We've recently gotten more and more information on Resident Evil Requiem, the newest and 9th main entry in the Resident Evil series. If you didn't know, I'm a huge Resident Evil fan. I've done a few videos about the series on the channel in the past, and have been a fan of it since I was probably far too young. One of my earliest flecks of memory was watching my dad and his friends take turns playing the original Resident Evil 2 on the PlayStation. That's how far back it goes. So today, I wanted to talk about some of the story possibilities of Resident Evil Requiem based on what I know from previous games, and what has been shown both in trailers and gameplay footage. So let's get started. Right off the bat, here's some of the concrete things that we know. You play as new character
Grace Ashcroft.
Grace Ashcroft, daughter to Alyssa Ashcroft, a character who debuted in Resident Evil Outbreak all the way back on the PS2 in the early 2000s. You also might play as Leon, but we don't have much solid info on that yet, besides rumors from the leaker Dusk Golem.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
Background on Alyssa Ashcroft is that she was or is an investigative reporter who survived the Raccoon City incident. Grace is her daughter and also the main character of the material we've seen so far. She is investigating a string of murders that are connected by mysterious circumstances and seemingly uses of BOWs, which includes the murder of her very own mother, Alyssa, 8 years before the events of Requiem.
I need your eyes on the crime scene, the Renwood Hotel. I know that's where your mother was murdered. Alyssa died 8 years ago. Perhaps it's time for you to face the past.
This murder took place at the Renwood Hotel, where a teenage Grace and her mother Alyssa were staying. While there, they receive a phone call asking for a Miss Ashcroft.
Hello?
Miss Ashcroft?
Yes.
Grace answers, and this immediately sets off Alyssa, who says,
They're coming.
And goes on high alert, trying to lead herself and her daughter out of the hotel safely. While trying to escape, they watch the hotel manager get murdered by a humanoid BOW in a raincoat.
I just need to find my...
After seemingly getting away to another part of the hotel, Grace has an anxiety attack, but is calmed by her mother, right before what seems to be her mother's murder. We then cut to the present. Grace is given a file by her director and told to investigate the hotel as a new lead has come from it. This causes Grace to flash back to her memories of the hotel before we cut to find that she is dangling upside down after apparently being kidnapped.
What is this?
The facility she is in is known as the Rhodes Hill Chronic Care Center, where she was apparently being experimented on in some way by somebody.
What is it doing?
It's worthy noting that Rhodes Hill was an area in Raccoon City, so this is more than likely taking place in Raccoon City. Grace manages to unstrap herself from the gurney that she is bound to, and begins to search for an escape, only to be stalked by a large, monstrous BOW creature that seems to be female and is allergic to light. It seems the facility she's in has had an infection spread through it itself, as well as the monster roaming free in its halls, possibly killing these scientists or doctors or whoever they are.
Infected.
It's possible that she was brought here by this man, who says that she, or possibly her mother, is perfect in some way, since we don't know when we're seeing this guy at what point in time.
I know now that you're the one that I've been searching for. The special one. The chosen one. Miss Ashcroft.
More than likely for experimentation. More weight is added to this theory when Grace gets off the gurney and says,
What is it doing?
In addition to all of this, we do see some flashes of Raccoon City, people being infected and possibly dying, as well as flashes of a Renwood hotel that is very run down. So, what can we gather from all of this information about what the story of Resident Evil Requiem is going to be about? Some of the more obvious points are that we are going to be playing Grace, who is investigating her mother's murder, and also the string of murders that seems to involve BOWs, as I said earlier. But there's more to it than that. The first thing I really want to focus on is both the title and some of what the devs have said about Requiem. This is meant to be a sort of swan song, so to speak, to Resident Evil as we've known it so far. Based on leaks by the leaker Dusk Golem, it could also be seen as a sort of beginning of a new era or closing of the previous era, as they try to bring forward new ideas to the series.
落音事件に関わった、もしくは落音事件に巻き込まれて大きく人生を変わってしまったり、命を落としてしまったりと、そういった登場人物がたくさん出ます。レクイエムは彼らに向けての言葉通り鎮魂であり、もっと言うとバイオハザードシリーズ、落音事件アンブレアをきっかけに生まれたシリーズのある種一つの区切りという意味でレクイエムというタイトルをつけています。
To me, this would mean we'd get some kind of closure on Raccoon City and Umbrella once and for all, and the dominoes it knocked down that led the series to where it is today. Since the series really does love to always go back to Umbrella and Oswald Spencer and all of these characters from the original 3 games, it would be nice to finally move on to a new phase, in a sense. We already have a direct connection with the earlier Resident Evil games with Alyssa Ashcroft, a character from a Resident Evil spin-off called Outbreak that was pretty popular among fans that primarily took place in Raccoon City and allowed you to see more of the city than you had in other games. The fandom has been excited about Alyssa being confirmed alive and canon since an article of hers was readable all the way back in Resident Evil 7 in 2017. And yes, I know it's shocking that Resident Evil 7 came out 8 years ago. This article would date Alyssa as being alive during at least January of 2016, and actively investigating BOW incidents such as the Baker House incident. By the way, the Baker House incident was covered up with the help of the BSAA, which is not relevant right now, but will be later. So we know that Alyssa was alive in 2016, and more than likely she was murdered sometime between then and 2018. Who is she murdered by? Well, we don't know for sure, but we do have clues. When alerted that someone asked for her, she says, "They're coming," which means it's a group of some kind, either being sent by an individual or an organization. We know that Alyssa was an investigative reporter who was seemingly focused on BOW incidents after the Raccoon City situation, so it could be possible that she dug into something that put her and Grace in grave danger, which is also why they are staying in a hotel, possibly on the run. It's kind of hard to tell. When they are attempting to escape, they see the desk man/manager murdered, and he is killed by someone who has seemingly been affected by some type of BOW modification. Be it a virus or a parasite, we don't really know. We can also note that the BOW humanoid is seemingly wearing a suit underneath their black raincoat, as we can see a white collared shirt and what seems to be a black suit jacket. We do see at least one other person seemingly getting infected by something similar in the trailer, specifically this cop. And we also see people who are dead who had been infected by something similar. This is an additional observation that I wanted to make while I was editing because I thought about it. If you look in the background of the cop changing, there's trash on the floor, which makes me think that this is taking place at the modern, run-down Renwood Hotel in the present of Resident Evil Requiem, and that something happens while Grace is there with the police that leads to her being kidnapped and taken to the facility that we see later in the different trailers. As I stated at the very start, I think there will be a lot of connections all the way back to Raccoon City, and this has basically been confirmed. Which, look, going back to Raccoon City and Umbrella is pretty old hat for Resident Evil and Capcom.
We also received word that an organization named Neo Umbrella just claimed responsibility for the attack.
Neo Umbrella.
I know what you're thinking.
Yeah. It's Raccoon City all over again.
But I think there will be some twists on it. If Capcom exceeds my expectations, which I hope they do, there are plenty of plot threads that were left open in Resident Evil 7 and 8, which both seem to connect to what we've seen in Requiem so far, as well as the greater Resident Evil canon. Besides dating her as being alive in early 2016, the article in Resident Evil 7 brought Alyssa back into the minds of Resident Evil fans. I don't think it's a coincidence that she is one of the main characters we've seen and is centered in the story of 9, and that she was mentioned in Resident Evil 7. I'm not saying they've been planning this from the very start, but they possibly went back to see what they could work with from what has already been established. There's going to be things that connect throughout the entire series, references to the earliest games, to 4, 5, and 6, probably plot threads that connect these all as well, but I think some of what we might be getting was hinted at in both the 2 most recent entries. This won't be a comprehensive retelling of everything from Resident Evil 7 and 8, or any of the games really. It's just the information I need to get my point across to you, the audience. Trust me, if I told you every little thing, this video could be like 6 hours long, if not longer. I'm sure some of you sickos would love that though, but that's not what we're here for today. The first connection that I wanted to focus on, funny enough, is The Connections. The Connections is an incredibly broad and bland name that was given to a criminal organization or organizations that develop and deal in the trade of BOWs. BOW, by the way, since I've been using the term a lot, stands for Bioorganic Weapon. And basically every monster enemy in the Resident Evil series is considered a bioorganic weapon. Zombies, mutants, etc., all of them are BOWs. The Connections was a group that was first mentioned in Resident Evil 7. To make a long story short, as I'm about to get into the nitty-gritty of it in a moment, the Connections are the people who made Evelyn the primary BOW antagonist of Resident Evil 7. The Connections are run by one Brandon Bailey, who was a former protege of Dr. James Marcus and would eventually become close with Oswell E. Spencer. We find this information not only through a DLC of Resident Evil Village called the Baker Incident, but also through files that we found all the way back in Resident Evil 5 in 2009. And while he's also mentioned as deceased in Resident Evil 5, do we really trust that? I mean, really? A bit of history on the series as a whole here. The T-Virus is the virus that started all of this all the way back in Resident Evil 1. The zombies, the bioorganic weapons, and everything. The T-Virus is an edited version of a virus known as the progenitor virus. The progenitor virus came from a flower in Africa known as the Stairway of the Sun. The progenitor virus itself is a retrovirus, meaning when you would become infected by it, it would change your DNA. It was also special because unlike most retroviruses, it could infect basically anything that could be infected by a virus, whether it be animal, human, or plant. The tribe that used this flower, known as the Nidapaya, were some of the people who created the first BOWs and in fact used the progenitor virus to enhance themselves if they didn't die in the process. Most people, when they get infected by it, they died. So Brandon Bailey was the protege of Dr. Marcus and would eventually become closer to Oswell E. Spencer, the man who ran Umbrella, being noted as his right-hand man, as well as the man who ran the Africa Research Center of Umbrella. Eventually, their visions would differ, apparently, and Bailey would break off to create the Connections, which is the crime syndicate that I am talking about. And just to make it clear, anyone who worked alongside Oswell E. Spencer doing the research at the highest positions of Umbrella was basically a eugenics-obsessed maniac. James Marcus, Oswell E. Spencer, William Birkin, basically the entire Ashford family, all of them are insane people obsessed with creating mutants and evolution.
I was to become a god.
Even if at some point they usually did have other reasons for working on this stuff. I've said all of this just to point out that I believe Brandon Bailey is suspect A as to who the man in the trailer is and who could be the main villain of Resident Evil Requiem, if not one of the villains in it. As to why these groups are spreading infections and creating new monsters is also to be seen. Seeing that Brandon Bailey was a protege of Dr. Marcus, another insane scientist obsessed with viruses and horrific evolution, I would not be surprised if Brandon Bailey was the same way. Insane and scary and obsessed with evolution or creating some perfect human being or perfect virus and ending the world. Who knows? But with Capcom, you never know. Every single character could be a new character, and every single organization could be a new one that just comes out of the woodwork but is connected in every way. They did that in Resident Evil 6 a lot. The Connections had a hand in the development of Evelyn in Resident Evil 7, as I said a moment ago. Evelyn was a BOW who had the power to create a bioorganic substance known as the Mold, which could mind control people and transform them into monsters called the Molded. Some of her victims retained their human forms but had twisted, violent versions of their personalities, while others became animal-like black sludge monsters. Both the human molded and the monstrous molded were not actually human anymore after a full infection, as slowly their body would be eaten away and replaced by the mold, just retaining what looked to be a human for some people and obviously the monsters for others. Ethan Winters is the main character of both 7 and 8, and he comes to the Baker house after getting a message from his wife Mia, who contacted him from that location. Mia had been missing for 3 years at that point, And during the story of Resident Evil 7, we find out that his wife Mia was working for the Connections, though it seems that Ethan never really finds out. She was basically a highly trained babysitter who watched the child BOW Evelyn. Evelyn was on a tanker ship because the Connections were afraid of her being taken by hostile rivals, one of which we will find out later was the BSAA. They keep coming up, don't they? Evelyn basically took over the ship and infected many of the crew, leading it to crash into a swamp where Mia and Evelyn were eventually found by the Baker family. This would lead to the subsequent infections of the Baker family and the prolonged 3-year incident simply known as the Baker House Incident. Evelyn would infect many different people and have the Baker family kidnap and transform many different people, creating a sort of horrific family unit for herself, which is apparently part of her own mental programming, but also something that she always wanted. Early on in that 3-year period, Lucas Baker, the psychopathic son of the Baker family, would be contacted by the Connections and given a serum to stop him from falling fully under Evelyn's influence. This was a deal to collaborate with the Connections. Lucas would help the Connections set up a lab in a nearby mine to study the evolution of Evelyn and her effects on those that she infected. Scientists from the Connections would even come out and work under Lucas, who, while horrifyingly psychopathic and sadistic, was also very intelligent. Lucas would eventually betray these scientists because he was an evil psychopath.
I've done terrible things. Horrible things. I killed your man. I tortured them. And I enjoyed every second, soldier boy.
Feeding them to the mold and continuing the research on his own, also playing his own variety of sick, twisted games on the different people who got infected or brought to the Baker property. Resident Evil 7 ends with Mia and Ethan being saved by Chris Redfield, wearing a Blue Umbrella outfit. It turns out that he was only assisting the group known as Blue Umbrella, which is a private military group that was formed out of the trusted remnants of the Umbrella Corporation to clean up BOWs as a sort of makeup for everything that the Red original Umbrella did. Chris was technically still part of the BSAA, acting as a captain of his own team. Chris would then go on to hunt Lucas down after the primary events of Resident Evil 7, who is trying to sell the information he gathered on the mold, specifically Evelyn, to an unknown criminal buyer. Chris would of course put a stop to this in the only way he knows how.
Game over.
As I mentioned earlier, a DLC for Resident Evil Village called the Baker Incident Report tells us that the BSAA covered up the Baker House incident to hide their failings to stop it from occurring in the first place, as apparently they'd sent a team that failed to dispatch Evelyn and the Connections previously, which is what caused the Connections to put her on the tanker ship to try to go into hiding in the first place. All of these incidents together would cause Chris to become disenchanted with the BSAA, even as one of its founding members. Based on information we'll have soon, it could be that Chris was right to distrust the BSAA from the start. This leads us into Resident Evil Village, which is the sequel to Resident Evil 7 directly. I'm not going to explain the whole plot of Village here, but condensed, the Connections got the mold, the strain of mutant fungus that created Evelyn, from an ancient BOW being known as Mother Miranda. The mold itself came from something known as the Black God or Megamycete, a gigantic fungal supercolony that has amazing inhuman powers and has been around apparently for a very long time, possibly thousands of years. The Megamycete could infect living people, connecting them to its gigantic fungal network. It could eat dead people and store their memories and consciousnesses, and more. Not only is this really cool, but it touches on something that Resident Evil has kind of touched on before way back in Resident Evil 5, which is BOW-like things exist in the Resident Evil universe even before the T-Virus was made. Both the Megamycete and the Progenitor virus, which is apparently a virus that is kind of in the DNA of everyone, are things that show that BOWs are just almost a natural thing in the Resident Evil universe. Miranda, having lost her daughter, Eva, to the Spanish flu in the year 1919, found the Megamycete the same year after going into a cave to end her own life because of her sorrow. She touched the Megamycete and upon doing so was infected and changed by it, and realized it had consumed the bodies of thousands and taken their personalities and memories because she was able to experience them upon touching it. She realized when doing this that it had taken the memories and personality of her daughter. Miranda, now connected to the Megamycete, or fungal root, would begin to experiment with it and on it. Note that the reason the mold stretched so far in Resident Evil 7 is also because one of these things apparently formed under the swamp as Evelyn infected more people. This is sort of the brain of the hive mind to a degree. It's interesting. Miranda, driven solely by the purpose of bringing her daughter back to life, would begin to experiment with other living beings using the Megamycete, and even the people of her own village, creating many different types of monsters in the process. She'd also meet and work with Oswell E. Spencer at some point during the mid-1900s. No, I'm not kidding. Capcom retconned it to where Mother Miranda inspired Oswell E. Spencer to try to force human evolution forward. Crazy stuff. I mean, all of this is crazy. Like, this is basically confirms BOWs are like natural, and the history of it goes way back before the main series. In fact, this gives me hope that I could eventually get my medieval, holding a sword and lantern Resident Evil game. Let's do it, Capcom, come on. Also, a quick aside, but I really dislike the retcon of Oswald E. Spencer being connected to Mother Miranda and apparently being inspired by her. It feels completely unnecessary, answers questions that I don't think anyone really cared about, like why they chose the logo to be for the company of Umbrella. Like, it just looks like an umbrella, that's a fine explanation. And then it adds additional questions that it doesn't really answer, like why didn't he go back to her to try to fix his lifespan when he was dying and things like that. Retcons like this always feel like they're either trying to cheaply connect this entry to the greater series in a way that just feels ham-fisted and unnecessary, or an individual writer trying to insert a character that they made into the greater series canon. And we already have a greater connection to the rest of the series through the use of Chris in the game, and Mother Miranda, while underutilized, is a cool character on her own, so we don't need that connection to Spencer to cement her in. That's just my 2 cents, though. Miranda would eventually make contact with the Connections, who promised to help her in exchange for samples to create their own weapons with the mold, which, by the way, the mold is actually a fungus. It was just called the mold in, like, Resident Evil 7. She would work with them, and they'd eventually create Evelyn, who is supposed to be both a weapon but also a vessel for Miranda's daughter, Eva. Miranda saw most all of these experiments, including Evelyn, as mistakes and failures. And this is where things get interesting and complicated. During the events of Resident Evil 7, both Ethan and Mia are infected by the mold. Though the primary cluster of fungus or mold within them was removed, Mia was the only one who was truly human anymore. To make a long story short, the Ethan that we play in Resident Evil Village is actually a full-on mold clone of the original Ethan, who apparently died when Jack struck him at the beginning of Resident Evil 7. The mold then slowly replaced every cell in his body and kind of brought him back to life. He is in essence the same person but a completely different person. Well, him and Mia also had a baby that was basically part mold human and part human, which Mother Miranda wanted, believing it to be the perfect vessel for her daughter, Ava. This baby's name was Rose, by the way. So the BSAA put Ethan and Mia into protective custody and into hiding and put them in Eastern Europe, coincidentally quite close to where Mother Miranda was. Apparently there is a mole in the BSAA from the Connections who then tipped Miranda off to their locations, but this all just seems too coincidental that the BSAA didn't kind of already know something. Mother Miranda, upon finding out that Ethan, Mia, and their baby, who is half human, half mold, Rose, is in Eastern Europe, goes and kidnaps Mia and replaces her to try and also steal the baby. It's a convoluted plan. We don't really know why she does it. Maybe she thinks it would be easier that way and less people would die. I don't know, because what ends up happening is a ton of people die. Long story short, Chris arrives and shoots the not Mia because Mother Miranda can change her form, and then the true events of Resident Evil Village occur. Chris by this point had left the BSAA after growing more and more distrustful of them, taking some of their best soldiers with him to create his own unit. They are armed by Blue Umbrella apparently, which is another interesting twist. Towards the end of Resident Evil Village, a large battle between Chris and the Molded plays out, where the BSAA also arrives and starts fighting Chris and his unit. After the final events of Resident Evil Village play out, Chris and his soldiers, having taken the body of one of the BSAA soldiers on board their plane, find out that the soldiers sent in by the BSAA were actually armed BOWs, and Chris vows to go to the BSAA headquarters in Europe to demand answers. And that is where we were left off at the end of Resident Evil Village before we head into Resident Evil Requiem. Had to explain a lot there to get to where I wanted to go, because those are the two biggest leads if you hadn't picked up on it. Both the connections in Brandon Bailey and the BSAA and their BOW soldiers. Why? How are they possibly connected to Requiem? Well, it's possible that the organizations hunting Alyssa and Grace in Resident Evil Requiem, both in the past and present, could be either group. It's more than likely the connections than the BSAA, as the connections are an illicit crime group, but still. It could also be that the creepy man we see, who apparently kidnapped Grace in the present, is the leader of the connections, Brandon Bailey. Brandon Bailey has strong connections to Umbrella, being the former protege of Dr. James Marcus, and apparently started a crime organization that focuses primarily on BOW research and weapons trading. Why he's hunting them, we don't know, but it could be that Alyssa was working on uncovering things about the connections, which would make sense as she seemed to be reporting on BOWs. Which might have been her calling after Raccoon City for all we know. I mean, having a big moment in your life like that, why wouldn't you want to keep going after that kind of thing? This would all tie together pretty well and give us an idea of what is going on in the trailers to some degree, but not the full picture. Why does Brandon Bailey want them? Why is Grace perfect in some way? And what is the monster stalking her? As for the BSAA, and the reason I brought that up, the connection there should be obvious. The BOW killer in the trailer looks similar to the BOW BSAA soldier at the end of Resident Evil Village. It could be that the BSAA has developed smarter BOWs that could be used for warfare or even assassination like we see in the Requiem trailer. Or, on an even more nefarious level, the BSAA could have been working with the connections and bought the bioweapons technology to make BOW soldiers. In addition to everything I've already mentioned and Chris's distrust of the BSAA, there is an underlying implication in Village that they knew more than they were letting on. The fact that they put Ethan and Mia out in Eastern Europe despite knowing that Miranda might be out there, the fact that they show up at the end of the game to fight the Mega Mycete, which would imply that they were watching the entire time. The characters in Chris's squad even go so far as saying so.
They had eyes on Miranda too. Probably felt they needed to intervene.
There's just a lot there that adds up to the BSAA doing something nefarious. Who knows, maybe they were even the buyer for Lucas's Evelyn data at the end of the Not a Hero DLC in Resident Evil 7. All of this together would also give the trilogy of games, 7, 8, and 9 an overarching story that could actually work quite well together, tying in some of the open plots left from both Resident Evil 7 with the connections and Resident Evil 8 with the villainous turn of the BSAA. It's possible that the BSAA began using bioweapons, believing they had to even the playing field against bioterrorists. Fight fire with fire, so to speak, but obviously this is a terrible idea. You're basically just creating more horrifying, unstable weapons that could lead to more and more mass casualty events, under the idea of making it easier or possibly even making money, who knows. As for the monster that is chasing Grace throughout the trailer, and more of the true goings-on of the game, we'll have to wait and see. The monster, to me, looks as if it is possibly Grace's mother, Alyssa. This would be an incredibly dark twist, of course, as she has been seriously mutilated and experimented on, and her mother's death is a big pain point for Grace in the trailer. Dusk Golem himself, the leaker, alluded to the possibility that this is Alyssa, saying her form is even meant to look like a throwback to Lisa Trevor, but the inverse, a mother hunting her daughter rather than a daughter hunting for her mother. This creature's design is also very similar to Lisa Trevor and even uses some of the exact same noises that that character used to show this similarity. As to why any of these groups are spreading infections and making monsters is also to be seen when the game comes out. Seeing that Brandon Bailey of the Connections was a protege of Dr. Marcus, another insane scientist obsessed with viruses and horrific evolutions of humanity, it wouldn't be surprising if Brandon Bailey himself was the very same way. Some type of insane evil megalomaniac who wants to turn people into horrible monstrosities for whatever reason. Then, of course, it could also be the BSAA. It would make sense for either organization, as the BSAA is an international anti-terrorist group with tons of funding, and the Connections is an international criminal group with tons of funding. Those are my primary theories anyway, and a big history lesson on the recent Resident Evil games, as well as how they connect back to some of the older ones. I hope you enjoyed it. I could be way off base, but I haven't been able to stop thinking of these connections, as someone who genuinely enjoys the crazy ways Capcom writes their own plots sometimes. Only Requiem itself will show us the truth of what is going on, and I'm excited to see how they tie everything together. It could be all brand new characters and just random new connections that have never been mentioned before, but I really do hope that they play with some of the already established lore that was kind of left up in the air. I mean, there's probably things from the past games that were left up in the air too, like things dealing with Wesker's dealings and Ada's in RE4, like where did Ada take the parasite at the end instead of taking it to Wesker? And I'm sure there was some type of fallout from all the big events that happened in Resident Evil 6, because there is some like massive stuff that happened in Resident Evil 6, though most people just don't like to think of Resident Evil 6 because of how weird and crazy it is. That hit me!
That is fucking... I was like, what?
Anyway, the game being called Resident Evil Requiem is important. As I said at the start, a requiem is a song that is a sort of remembrance or send-off, a devotion to those who've passed, usually. So this, in a sense, will be a Resident Evil game that pays tribute to all of those that came before. I said in a sense because I don't think it'll be like a nostalgic-fueled throwback fest, but more a very loving and sentimental tribute to what Resident Evil was and is in the way that the game is made. Now, having said that, apparently there will be a lot of throwbacks and references as well as key story points that connect to other Resident Evil games. I'm pretty excited to see how all of this plays out and how it does connect back to everything. As a longtime fan of this series, I would love to see a bunch of little plot points throughout the entire series that just got abandoned, picked back up, and suddenly has been like, oh, this actually makes sense and is needed. That's all I could really want from the game, is just something that is a cohesive, maybe not permanent ending, but a sort of send-off to Resident Evil as it has been so far. I think that would be really fun. I hope you can tell that I really love Resident Evil as a series through this, even if I am wrong about everything, which there's a very big possibility of that. Capcom does like to just come up with new characters and new organizations and all these different things from game to game, just to, like, create the new story that they want to do. It seems like, you know, the type of game they want to make comes first before the story, which is not a bad thing because it's made some fantastic games. I'm looking forward to more material coming out about the game, and maybe if they do and people actually like this video, I'll do some more covering what comes out and giving my theories and stuff on it. So far, these are all the theories that I have because there isn't really enough to like make these broad speculations about what is really going on. To say a few final things, it's interesting that there are zombie-like BOWs that can kill people and do things in human ways, like the BSAA soldier and the one from the Requiem trailer. And it's interesting to see the monster that is chasing Grace, because a lot of the reason the monsters looked so messed up throughout the series is because people were experimenting on things early on. And so whatever this monster is, it looks like someone was doing experiments. Like, this is probably not how this creature was meant to turn out. And if it was, that's pretty horrifying. So I also wonder, like, what the villain's motivations are and things like that. From the little that we see in the trailer, it does seem like they have some type of specific want that they want. They tell one of the Ashcrofts that they are perfect, you know?
I know now that you're the one that I've been searching for. The special one. The chosen one. Miss Ashcroft.
It would be very interesting to have this greater villain that has been in the background throughout the series, whose main motivation was not eugenics, but maybe something like Mother Miranda in Resident Evil Village, where they have this very personal thing and they've done all these horrible things to fulfill that goal. Those are some of the scariest and craziest kinds of people. And also, as I mentioned shortly at the start, apparently Leon is supposed to be in the game too, if the rumors are to be believed. But I honestly have no idea how he'll be included. He could be hunting to find and help Grace, while solving a mystery himself, taking down the Connections or the BSAA, which have become intertwined into some evil secretive supergroup and conspiracy. My guess is that he's being sent to help and find Grace after she's kidnapped or whatever, but I could totally be wrong. Again, we have no clue. Or maybe he just gets drunk with Ada and ends up having lots of flaming hot Speaking of Ada, it would actually make sense if she was in the game too. Maybe she worked for the Connections before. That could be a lot of fun if we even just see her momentarily. I'd love to see Ada again, and I'd love to see even just a little bit of Jill and a few other characters. Hell, maybe they should just cram every character in the series into this game. I'm just spitballing here, but you know, Fans would probably love that. All Resident Evil fans are ever asking for is to see old characters again and again. And maybe this is the one where they should finally do it so they can move on to new people in the next one. Anyway, thanks to my patrons. Much love to you guys and your support. I really appreciate it. Thank you to my channel members. Thank you for watching. I hope you have a lovely day. And I'm still just rambling here and I'm still just talking. We've almost hit the 30-minute mark, but I'm not going to keep rambling for that long. I hope you enjoyed my last video, the one about people still live here. That took a long time too. And anyway, I'm Ghost on Holiday. And remember, pee pee poo poo, butthole butt, stink boopy poo poo poo.